Hello.
Welcome to The Revealing. I am your host, Pavarati, here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. As a disclaimer, this channel is for entertainment purposes. These are my opinions. I'm not here to slander, so let's get started. Today, in this episode, folks, first of all, I've put together my theory of what really took place in this atrocity and the events that led up to it and the events that were post the atrocity. However, I'm putting all that to the side for now, because if I am wrong, on the very slim chance that I am wrong, then I want to be fair to both sides. So this one, somebody should send it to Ann Taylor. I'm not going to do it. But I've taken all of the evidence against Mr. Kohberger listed in the PCA, listed every piece of evidence connecting him to the actual atrocity. And I have disproven every piece of evidence listed in the PCA that ties him to the atrocity. And it wasn't really hard. Most of the evidence that ties him to the atrocity in the PCA is actually later in the PCA. It actually rules him out. It actually disproves their own evidence, their own arguments. It turns out the PCA is just one big, here's the evidence, here's why it's not true, and then here's a long paragraph statement of my experience and whatever, and let me explain this big story that tells you why that this evidence should be used against him, even though I've just contradicted the evidence itself. It sounds confusing, and I know I've gone over this in the last few videos, but what I'm trying to do in this one is I'm going to make it clear and concise for you so that you can absolutely understand what it is that I'm saying. So with that being said, let's just get started with it.
Okay, folks, so why don't we get into this? Now, after going through the entire PCA, both of them, about 200 times now, I have extrapolated all of the evidence that the state claims to have against Bryan Kohberger. And I've listed them, as you'll see here, in numbered order. We'll go through the numbers real quick. First one is eyewitness testimony by DM. And we'll discuss all these in further detail as I go through, but I'm going to make this stuff really clear for you. Number two is the white Hyundai Elantra seen on video near the crime scene at the time of the homicides, the unalivings, Cast records of Bryan Kohberger's phone 24 hours prior and after the crime. FBI unmasking of phones in the area during the time of the crime. Historical cast records of Bryan Kohberger's phone showing activity over the months prior to the crime alluding to stalking the victims. Results from the IGG investigation. Finally, touch transfer DNA on a movable object found at the crime scene. Okay, that's it. That is absolutely it. Everything else in the PCAs are strictly Officer Payne and Bleeker's opinions. Every single thing else in the PCAs, if you go and you look, they're constructs of their opinions based on these circumstances of evidence. Based on my experience, this is what happened. I mean, it's absolutely nothing. None of it means a thing. It's just pure made up. So what we need to do, though, is go through this actual evidence that they claim to have against him. And what we're going to use to disprove the evidence is almost always the PCA itself. It is absolutely incredible. The PCA, the information listed in the PCA lists the evidence, and then it lists the reason that the evidence should be thrown out and they should have went in another direction. It's perplexing when you look at it this way. Okay, the first one, eyewitness testimony, DM. Okay, DM saw a male 5'10" or taller, not muscular, but athletically built with bushy eyebrows. Okay, so DM would be required to identify Mr. Kohberger out of a photo lineup or a live lineup with 5 other individuals with similar characteristics for this to be an eyewitness identification. and this would have been described somewhere in the PCA. She picked him out. It never is, though. So that indicates that she never identified Kohberger as the assailant. She never did. That is an absolute farce. And nowhere in here does it say that she did. So they cannot use an eyewitness description or an eyewitness identification of a suspect when the eyewitness doesn't actually identify the suspect. They give a general description. And then you'll see the only identification of the suspect comes from the officers. His driver's license indicates that Kohberger, by the way, when you look at these in yellow, this is taken directly out of the PCA. The license indicates that Kohberger is a white male with a height of 6 foot and weighs 185 pounds. Additionally, the photograph of Kohberger shows that he has bushy eyebrows. Kohberger's physical description is consistent with the description of the male DM saw inside the King Road residence on November 13th. So there was never an eyewitness identification. She gave a general description of some features of characteristics of a person, and Mr. Payne actually used her description and put it in his PCA that his driver's license matched those characteristics, and that's their eyewitness identification. Okay, so that one's gone. Null and void. There you go, Miss Taylor. And you can see in the blue is where I've got my synopsis. And DM never identified Kohberger. Payne cannot make an eyewitness identification for her from the defendant's statement, from DM's statement, and then viewing Kohberger's driver's license as described below. So that's ridiculous. Okay, so get rid of that one, Miss Taylor. Now, the next one is the white Hyundai Elantra that we've all heard so much about, right? And this thing actually, I misspelled video there. This thing actually determines the time of the atrocity based on law enforcement's mind. But let's look at what we've got here to disprove the Hyundai Elantra theory. Straight out of the PCA. The PCA disproves it itself. But number one, we got the forensic examiner who has 35 years of law enforcement experience with 12 years at the FBI. His training includes identifying unique characteristics of vehicles. He uses a database that gives visual cues of vehicles across states to identify differences between vehicles. This is their expert. After reviewing the numerous observations of suspect vehicle 1, referring to the night of the atrocity, the cameras in proximity of the event, the forensic examiner initially believed that suspect vehicle number 1 was a 2011 to 2013 Hyundai Elantra. That is not what happened. The forensic examiner identified the vehicle as a 2011 to 2013 Hyundai Elantra based on the characteristics that he had seen in the camera footage surrounding the King Road home during the time of the atrocity. Now let's let the PCA go ahead and disprove that statement. A video of the white sedan seen on Nevada Street in Pullman, Washington, verified to be Kohberger's Elantra, was provided to the same FBI examiner. The FBI examiner identified this vehicle as a 2014 to 2016 white Hyundai Elantra. So the FBI expert identified the vehicle around the crime scene as a 2011 to 2013, and the same FBI expert later identified Mr. Kohberger's known Elantra as a 14 to 16. So rule him out. That was not the same car based on the FBI examiner, and these are both taken out of the same dang PCA. It's amazing. They disproved their facts in their own PCA. Synopsis. The FBI forensic examiner verified that Kohberger's Elantra was not the Elantra identified at the King Road residence. That is verified through statements in the PCA itself. The PCA itself disproves the PCA. This alone should have either eliminated Kohberger as a suspect or required an interview to continue in his direction. Obviously, that did not happen. So, the Hyundai Elantra, gone. There you go, Aunt Taylor. It's gone. Cast records of Bryan Kohberger's phone 24 hours prior to and after the crime. Now, this is, again, out of the PCA. At approximately 2:47 a.m., the 8458 phone stops reporting to the network, which is consistent with either the phone being in an area without cellular coverage, the connection to the network is disabled, such as putting the phone in airplane mode, or that the phone is turned off. The 8458 phone does not report to the network again until approximately 4:48. So in other words, Kohberger's whereabouts cannot be determined during this time frame. We cannot put him anywhere near the crime scene. So regardless of all of in my experience and opinions that they put all in this PCA, drawing these big long paragraphs of why he turned his phone off and he should have been there, the actual evidence shows in the PCA, it's written right there for you, that we cannot determine where he's at between this time frame, the time of the atrocity. We have no idea. And here's our proof in the PCA. Now, I love this one.
Sometimes it's not about evidence. It's about the lack of evidence that actually matters. In this particular case, we had a cell phone that was turned off for a very specific window of time. During a window of time where 4 people were murdered, and he is the singular suspect. That means something.
My friends, may be the dumbest statement that anybody has ever made on national TV. I mean, idiotic. The lack of evidence is sometimes the best evidence against somebody. Are you out of your freaking mind? Based on that, the entire city of Moscow should be arraigned for the atrocity that happened on King Road, based on that logic. You freaking monkey.
Let's go to the next one. The FBI unmasking of phones in the area during the time of the crime. We all heard that, right? How they unmasked all the phones in the area and his 8458 phone. There was a lot of discussion around it. That's why we thought, yeah, he must have been in the area. But if you actually read the PCA, like all these people on mainstream media apparently don't, because I know I've heard them many times talk about how they found his phone in the area with this, but they just didn't read it right. Because as part of the investigation, law enforcement obtained search warrants to determine cellular devices that utilize towers in close proximity to the King Road residence on November 13, 2022, between 3 and 5 a.m. After determining that Kohberger was associated to both the 2015 white Elantra and the 8458 phone, investigators reviewed these search warrants returns. A query of the 8458 phone in these returns did not show the 8458 phone utilizing cellular tower resources in close proximity to the King Road residence between 3 and 5 a.m. So what does it say right there, folks? Did not show. See there? Did not show. So again, it's saying he's not even in close proximity to the King Road residence between 3 and 5 a.m., or at least his phone isn't. That's in the PCA itself. It's amazing. So again, the PCA itself proves that Kohberger's phone wasn't in the area at the time of the crime, during the time of the crime. Let's go to his CAS data, that CSAL, whatever team, got all that info. Historical records. Both the judge, why were they using the historical records? First of all, the historical records were being used so that they could show, as they clearly had written long paragraphs about what assailants usually do in their opinions and their experience during the months prior to an atrocity like this, like they have any experience in this matter, zero. But in atrocities like this, their experience over the months prior to this indicates a stalking aspect by him traveling to and from the areas 12 times, right? It's listed all that. I didn't write all that in there because we know that both the judge and the prosecutor stated in court that this is false and that Bryan Kohberger did not stalk the victims. That'll never be brought up. And as far as him following the victims online, That will never be brought up as well because the prosecutors already said in a response to a motion that the fact that Mr. Kohberger may have followed people online would not be admissible in court. So it will never be brought up as well. That one's gone. Results from the IGG investigation. That's going to be in front of your face here for the next probably month or two. That's already been stated by the prosecution and the judge that this will never ever be brought up in trial. The jury will never hear anything about the IGG investigation during the trial. So that one shouldn't even be discussed. The only other evidence they have listed against Mr. Kohberger is this touch transfer DNA on a movable object found at the crime scene. If I was the defense attorney, this is what I would do. I would take Mr. Payne's statement in the PCA. I later noticed what appeared to be a leather knife sheath laying on the bed next to one of the victims. And then I would take Mr. Blaker's PCA that states, I was later informed by Idaho State Police Forensic Team that a leather knife sheath was found laying on the bed next to one of the victims. And then I would compare them, and you'll notice that they're both standing next to each other in their statements when this happens. One of them sees it, the other one doesn't. The one that sees it doesn't say anything to the other one apparently, and he has to wait for the forensic team later to discover it. Okay, so there is some very inconsistent statements about this knife sheath in the first place that could bring up some very big questions about the legitimacy of it. That's not all. Of course, you go to Mr. Blaker's application for the search warrant in the PCA to get Mr. Kohberger's apartment searched, where he states, we expect to find a knife or any sheath for that knife. So that means before they ever get into the aspect of how good is touch DNA or skin cells for all that matter, you've got the two investigating officers in their sworn statements in the PCA both explaining things that bring up the biggest questions you could ever possibly want to bring up about the credibility of the knife sheath and the DNA. So I just wanted to go through all of the evidence that they have against Mr. Kohberger, and as you can see, most of that evidence is actually contradicted in the PCA itself. It says that the evidence is not there. Oh yeah, we've got this evidence. Oh yeah, by the way, but then we found this out, and now it turns out we don't. But we're still going to say it's evidence in this PCA. So if you don't read it close, you won't even know. That's what happened in this. Other things have been eliminated by the prosecution and the judge during these little hearings. But if I was Ann Taylor, we'll leave it at that. Let's wrap this thing up.
Okay, to wrap this thing up, all the evidence against Mr. Kohberger is easily disproven by the PCA itself or by statements now made in these hearings. So instead of doing all this other stuff that you see going on in these hearings, Ann Taylor should progress to the obvious next step. She should file 6 motions to suppress. 6 motions to suppress all of the evidence that they're trying to say goes against Mr. Kohberger. Those 6 things that I just brought up, those should be filed to suppress. And I just gave her the easy arguments to get them suppressed. Heck, I didn't even have to give them to her. It says it in the PCA itself. So file those motions to suppress, Ms. Taylor, if this is really what the case is about. Now, if it isn't what the case is about, if the case is about something totally different, like I have contended since my first video, folks, then we need to figure out what this case is really about. And you know, for those of you out there that really enjoy my timeline series and you get to hear Pavarotti's real thoughts on the case, I've got a special one coming to you Friday. And since I've got my new toys and I'm able to actually use my visuals correctly, I think you're going to find this timeline to be the most eye-opening one yet. So I can't wait to show it to you Friday. But until then, if you like the way that I do these videos, just please like and subscribe to them. Hit the like button. What is it did I say here? Hit the like button. Like and subscribe to the channel. Post your comments, your criticisms, post your thoughts. I've been reading them all week, and of course I enjoy them. And until next time, folks, Pavarotti's out.